The Ableism as Animal Monologue series. The Ableism as Animal Monologue series is a series of 6 monologues inspired by coloring sheets I completed during a psychiatric hospitalization in 2024. The series examines themes related to ableism and sanism in psychiatric healthcare. Each of the monologues uses animals, a special interest of mine, as an entry point for exploration. The series was written in September 2024. Ableism as Animal, Monologue 1. Just because you can physically restrain a bear doesn't mean psychiatric teams should. A bear lies alone, signifying that she is going about her life in her usual way. Suddenly, the bear is surrounded by eyes who are surveilling her as she goes about her life. The number of eyes surveilling the bear increases, and the bear tries to move away from them. The bear attempts to explain how the eyes, many of which belong to medical professionals, function as police and are complicit in the disposal of mad and mentally ill people. The bear grows increasingly angry about this and soon needs psychiatric medications to manage her moods. The bear takes her medicine regularly, but forgets for a few weeks and has a mental health episode as a result. She finds herself in the emergency room in the center of all the eyes, and after loudly offering her critique of the mental health system, she is labeled as aggressive and involuntarily detained. When the bear continues to protest, she is restrained. She tries to resist, but she can't get away. The hospital calls security. The nurse is prepared to inject her with medications to sedate her. After she is injected with sedatives and falls asleep, security leaves. When she wakes up, the bear decides to remain quiet, but in her mind, she dreams of a day when mad and mentally ill people have control of the health systems they find themselves trapped in. The bear is sent to a psychiatric facility where she is involuntarily held for several weeks. The bear stops thinking about her critique of the mental health system as she tries to heal from these events. Months later, after moving on from these events through community-based healing outside of the medical system, the bear speaks to the surveilling eyes, the medical professionals. She asks the hospital to put money towards giving mad and mentally ill people control over their experiences in psychiatric care. End of Monologue 1. Ableism as Animal, Monologue 2. Bats evolved to fly at night. They don't need psych meds to sleep. One of the complex pieces of having a psychiatric crisis is people undergoing crises often need support, but very often the support given is not well aligned with the patient's current or long-term needs and values. The main purpose of a mental health hospitalization is not to heal a person, but rather to stabilize a crisis. And most of the indicators related to stabilization, things like taking meds, activities of daily living, such as eating, showering, and cleaning your space, and not getting into fights and arguments, are ultimately about social compliance. The quickest way to get out of an involuntary hospitalization is usually to just comply with everything the providers tell you, regardless if their choices align with your wishes. Even genuine questions can be inferred as being disagreeable or can lead to a patient getting labeled as aggressive. A lot of the time, patients get branded this way without even knowing that this has occurred. A staff member may observe something, add it to their chart, and a reputation builds from there. They may have to then stay for days or weeks longer. Certain patients are more likely to experience this. Those who are impacted by mental health stigma alongside racism, transphobia, sexism, and/or classism are disproportionately affected. Staying in treatment longer might be an okay thing if people were receiving the therapies they wanted or a detailed discharge plan was being prepared. But due to the understaffing of case managers and of other key staff across the mental health system, many patients leave with very incomplete plans about what is going to happen next. Inpatient providers often put patients on highly sedating meds when they are hospitalized because it aligns with their short-term treatment goals, even if the trigger for the crisis was something in a patient's environment, like a traumatic event. Many patients do not actually need these meds or this dosage, but they are put on them nonetheless, and many providers will insist that they should stay on them. But not every mental health symptom needs fixing. Some humans, like bats, stay awake most of the night. Bats evolved to fly at night and learned how to see through darkness. They don't need to use psych meds to fall asleep at 10 p.m. Similarly, some human brains just have alternative ways of being and don't need to be medicated or over-medicated out of them. This is one important reason why I believe that psychiatric care needs oversight and leadership by mad and mentally ill people. End of Monologue 2. Monologue 3. When a duck injures its wing, it doesn't matter how high it can fly. I've been thinking a lot about how people in crisis, especially mad and mentally ill people in mental health crises, are particularly susceptible to being harmed in these moments of vulnerability, almost always by capitalism and related systems. Like if you try to throw a stick at a duck, they will normally fly away. But if a duck injures its wing, it doesn't matter how high it can fly. It could very well get hit just by its circumstances. This is how capitalism traps mad people. The total cost of my involuntary psychiatric hospitalization in 2024 was over $60,000. For the vast majority of patients, including those who are hospitalized involuntarily, a single error in billing or a rejection of coverage on any part of their treatment can be financially devastating. And even those privileged enough to have good health insurance can incur other large costs as a result of a psychiatric episode. Costs like predatory credit card and lending schemes and overspending, gambling and other expensive addictions, physical health conditions that go unmanaged, damages, fines, and legal bills related to psychosis and mania, and medical debt for costs not covered by insurance. These expenses often show up at extremely vulnerable times, in the weeks and months after a psychiatric hospitalization, when people are just getting back to their activities and getting their lives back together. Even if the costs are ones that a patient can find some relief on, there is often a huge admin cost associated with them in terms of the hours, days, and weeks of calls and paperwork and other work to resolve them. In states with paid medical leave, people have a little more protection if you have a job before the event and can recover quickly enough to return. But still, these costs can screw people even in the best situations. For others who are not returning to work and are needing to apply for disability benefits, which are almost always rejected on the first application, these costs can be devastating and life-changing. This raises some questions. Why do we make it so difficult for mad people to heal? And why do we make it so difficult for mad people to survive? Is it really as simple as that under capitalism it is inconvenient for mad and mentally ill people to be here? We need to move mental health services into the community, and we need to invest the huge amount of money and other resources spent on psychiatric hospitalizations into community-based services and healing resources so that fewer people are forced to resort to psychiatric hospitalizations. End of Monologue 3. Ableism as Animal, Monologue 4. Sharks don't believe people have long COVID. I hurt, I'm tired, and a lot of people don't believe me. There are many presentations of long COVID, but fewer reactions from healthcare providers. 1. Disbelief. No positive test or no diagnosis, common. 2. Non-serious belief. Placed on a 9-month waiting list for some services, which is also extremely common. And 3rd, real belief. Connection to services, but those services are not only mostly unaffordable, but are difficult to utilize practically. Honestly, multiple medical and therapy appointments a week for a patient with chronic fatigue, it shouldn't take a disabled person to explain why that is unrealistic. From the health system's perspective, the hope for 1, 2, and 3 is that patients will improve or disappear on their own. So why bother with the appointments? A lot of patients really do just give up. So if you can't give us medicine for the symptoms of long COVID, there are a lot of other medicines that the disabled community does need. Things like disability rights law enforcement, community input and control of hospitals, national paid sick time and medical leave, ongoing public education about long COVID, affordable housing and eviction moratoriums, universal basic income and universal health care, reductions in administrative burden on everything, and spaces to memorialize those who were lost during the pandemic. Something I haven't heard talked about hardly at all is the intersection between psychiatric hospitalizations and long COVID. What are the experiences of people with long COVID in psychiatric hospitals? How does having long COVID increase your risk of having a mental health emergency? How does being mad and systemically marginalized increase your risk of getting long COVID? How many people get COVID and thus long COVID as a result of psychiatric hospitalizations? We need people with lived experience surviving systems to have control over how they are designed and implemented. Otherwise, this mess will just keep growing. Where is the representation of long COVID patients at the health system and health policy levels? Where is the representation of long COVID patients in shaping mental health policy? Why don't we have say and control? Particularly with limited resources allocated to long COVID, the long COVID community's voice and priorities should be centered. End of Monologue 4. Ableism as Animal, Monologue 5. Am I a beaver building dams and causing floods? Beavers have a reputation for being very hardworking animals. They do most of it at night, nocturnal chewing, building, hustling. Beavers build their dams and lodges to create places for them to live. They live in pairs and raise 2 to 4 kits each year. We people also spend a lot of time building places to live. Many of us don't physically create the structures we sleep in, but we do actively furnish them, fence them, decorate them, oftentimes materially, but also psychologically and spiritually. Beaver dams manifest calmer areas within river currents for safety. Relatedly, people live in homes to escape the dangers of the street. Sometimes beavers build very huge dams that cause major floods. These are often good for ecosystems but can become problematic. Most commonly, they disrupt farming and other human plans. This summer, I let go of my backpack and reflected for nights on what in there I actually need versus what in there I'd collected as part of my dam. It turns out I did not actually need quite a few things, and many, if not most, I only needed to maintain a job. It's the thing that I keep thinking about, how capitalism traps us in needing a job for healthcare and consuming for the job and to maintain our job. This is true for everyone, and especially for disabled people. We have no choice but to have health insurance or go broke. These days, one 15-minute primary care visit is $300 to $700, and to access most disability benefits, you need provider notes. In managing my out-of-state medical leave, I had 1 to 2 appointments per week, many in large part because I needed paperwork, which adds up to thousands of dollars per month in costs just to navigate administrative burden. I don't know how to work and to also not consume. I'm trying to be more careful in buying, but I feel so stuck. Take my phone. I need a phone to get into many accounts, to follow up on insurance and apply for jobs. I let go of my backpack because I felt it was wrong to have all that most everything in there, especially the tech, was made from the exploitation of humans, children, nature. I do not intend to exploit and often try very hard not to, but here I am made to exploit nonetheless. And it is invisibilized because society accepts it. I know it's wrong, and I still feel it is my best option sometimes. So now I'm finding myself asking more and more, am I a beaver building dams and causing floods? And how big of a dam and lodge do I actually need? I think many of us justify consumption beyond what we need as being a reward for the exploitation and extraction of our labor. So it makes sense to cut some of that excess out and reduce it, right? I think the answer is yes, and is clear-cut in the extremes. Do I need a private jet? No. Do I need a huge living space? No. But sitting here, do I need new clothes? Yes, no. Is it okay if they're vintage instead of new? Yes, no. What about my sticker printer and other art supplies? Yes, no. It's not a need. I should only keep what I need to survive, right? What if I need art and joy for survival and growth, to prevent me from becoming an even more hardened exploiter? Beavers build dams, and they leave behind floods, and they often don't know the consequences of them. They just build and work to rebuild when their work gets broken. I hate what capitalism has done to the human beaver. End of Monologue 5. Ableism as Animal, Monologue 6. We people are very bad at being polar bears. I was reading about polar bears alone last night in my room. Polar bears live in the cold and often barren Arctic, also alone. They roam these vast territories they have claimed through solitary fight. For them, existing alone reduces conflicts and preserves energy, which means they live alone mostly because it helps them survive. We people are very bad at being polar bears. Loneliness and isolation shave years off human life expectancy. They increase risk for depression, cognitive decline, and heart disease, which is why loneliness and isolation are now a recognized epidemic in the US. 1 in 10 adults say they feel lonely every single day, and nearly 1 in 3 of us report loneliness at least once a week. I've been searching hard lately for the root of my addictions and suicidality, and it feels embarrassing to admit, even in monologue to myself, that when I dig far enough down, past the defenses and other bullshit, one reason I hurt so badly is often simply because I'm lonely. I have spent a lot, if not most of my life, invisible in shadows. There are several experiences of loneliness that I identify with, being queer and closeted, and also having an unrelenting Catholic faith, being transgender and not transitioning publicly until adulthood, being neurodivergent with a brain that is hard for many to decipher, and having chronic pain and fatigue and being stuck in bed oftentimes. I often feel safest around addicts and others with bipolar or schizophrenia because, like me, many of these folks exist at least partially in invisible realities. Most have been badly abused by people, healthcare, and carceral systems, and at the same time also have harmed people and carry guilt and shame. There is less of this make-believe game about being a good or perfect person, but rather acceptance that we are neither all good nor all bad. The main reason I am writing about loneliness here is because I want to heal, and I believe that for me to find healing in this world, I need to stop pretending to be a polar bear. It still feels vulnerable to say, but the thing I've always craved in my soul, more than anything else, is to be seen deeply, in all my colors and in my complexity. I want to know people. I want to be known. I want to not be alone in my head. I think most of us want that, and many of us are terrified we are not worthy. I can't promise that you'll like what you find or see about me, but I can promise you that I'm trying my best to be a human. End of Monologue 6.